Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Alex Slosby, Chief Growth Officer here at InnoLead, and I'm excited to have you join us for our webcast today, Venture Building 2.0, Past Mistakes, New Principles, and a Path to Delivering Meaningful Growth with Jon Corshen, the co-founder and managing partner of venture building studio Pilot 44. We'll get started in a minute, but while everyone is settling in, please do share in the chat where you're connecting in from. It's always great to see the global reach that we have. I am just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, as I pretty much always am, and it is a chilly late winter day. Jon, I believe you are in the Presidio in the Silicon Valley. Is that the case?
That is true in San Francisco, and it is a beautiful, sparkling day here.
Fantastic. The Presidio in the San Francisco in the Silicon Valley, right? Should be all capitalized. That is wonderful. We've got folks coming in. Oh, one Manuel, great, from Santiago. Thank you. Kristen up in Brunswick, Maine. It's great. We kind of bring together this global community of innovators and folks passionate about innovation, which is fantastic. And certainly this topic, which is such an important one, perennially, which is how do corporations build new ventures, build new growth organically, and which is always hard. So I'm excited. We'll discuss it today. Again, everybody, welcome. Alex Slosby, Chief Growth Officer here with InnoLead. Excited to welcome you to our webcast. Let's get started in a minute. Jon's got some great things to go through. We've got a great discussion planned. As is always the case, today's webcast is being recorded, and we'll share both replay and the slides. Please do take advantage of Zoom's Q&A and chat features. We'll be monitoring those and want to make sure your voices are included. So share questions and comments with us, and we'll address them as we go. And also at the end. And I just also want to let you know that Jon and I will be hosting an Ask Us Anything call next Wednesday, which will be a Zoom meeting, not a webinar. So everybody will be on camera, and we can have a great follow-on discussion to what we talk about today. So let's get started again. Welcome to our webcast, Venture Building 2.0, Past Mistakes, New Principles, and a Path to Delivering Meaningful Growth with Jon Corshen, co-founder and managing partner of venture building studio Pilot 44. Jon brings 25 years of leadership developing successful enterprise and internet software companies and deep expertise spanning nearly every aspect of software design, development, marketing, and sales to his work with corporations. And he's got a deep passion for disruptive technology, novel innovation, and sustainable corporate growth. And we're going to talk about all of those things today. So without further ado, everybody, welcome. Jon, let's get started. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Here's briefly an agenda that we're going to go through today. The first three sections, a brief introduction to Pilot 44, the evolution of corporate innovation models, and venture building basics, we're going to go through really quick in 10 minutes. Because we really want to spend the majority of the session talking about the 5 principles of venture building, giving Alex an opportunity to ask some questions as well as the folks on the call. And so bear with me because I'm going to go super fast through 1 through 3. I think you'll all get it, and then we'll take a breath and get into the meat of it. So. Very quickly, Pilot 44, we are a brand innovation and venture building studio. We utilize modern innovation methodologies to help our customers both build and create new brands, products, and businesses, as well as to grow existing ones. We're about 45 people. As Alex said, we're in San Francisco. We have offices in Europe and Singapore, and quite a breadth of experience across that. We are primarily a consumer brand-focused company, and obviously I know that the folks on the call are not all consumer brands, but I would argue that at least 80, if not more, percent of what we'll talk about when we talk about the principles will apply to business or to other industries. As it relates to consumer brands, as you see here, we're trusted by some of the largest brands in the world to deliver new products and innovation that touches billions of consumers every day. Our services very quickly break down into 2 primary parts. One is brand innovation, which is leveraging advanced technologies and modern digital practices and technologies, as well as innovative brand strategies to drive brand growth. And that could be anything from using neural networks to drive skincare recommendations to understanding how to use AI to find the right influencers and develop the right influencer programs. And then what's really relevant today is our venture building practice. This practice is, as I mentioned, is really focused on creating new products, brands, and businesses through the utilization of modern venture building methodologies. As you'll see, also very lastly, is that we have two primary sort of foundational methodologies that all of our work is done. Open innovation, which is really about bringing the outside in, leveraging the market, but also the startup ecosystem as a proxy for understanding what new trends and practices are evolving, what the competitive landscape looks like, what the market landscape looks like, and so forth. And then venture building, which we'll be talking about as we talk about some of the principles and our view on what's working in terms of process tools and workflows. As far as creating brands, just quickly some examples. We helped launch the Glad to be Green, which is a bioplastic bag. This hit shelves, sold about 100,000 units, and is now going to be repackaged under a formal launch. We're in the process of developing from initial ideation through in-market incubation, including commercialization, a new hemp-based functional beverage that will hit the market a little bit later this year. And we recently released for another company a gum and energy mints for the convenience store channel, and that is actually on shelf and doing quite well. In addition to the brand innovation work and the building of new ventures, we also run major accelerator programs, or work closely with major accelerator programs, a few of which you can see here, in helping them to design their overall venture and growth strategy as well as their programs. So what we're really focusing on today as we think about venture building is really the innovator's dilemma. And I know Alex and InnoLead, as well as us, are huge fans of Clayton Christensen and the work that he did in sort of writing the seminal book on corporate innovation. And if there's any point that you took away from that book in terms of one of the core hypotheses, it was that the reason why it's so difficult for firms to capitalize on disruptive innovation is the processes and business models that make them great on their existing business actually make them bad at competing for disruption. And I've been working with Pilot 44 and trying to crack the code with these large brands on the innovator's dilemma for almost a decade. So much of what we'll talk about is based on those real life experiences. But as everyone on the call knows, it's not trivial. And we've learned a lot over the last decade, and we'll share some of those key learnings with you in a moment here. I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't totally realize this until several years into our venture building work. And it's, pretty simple point, but incremental innovation and disruptive innovation are not just different, but almost polar opposites in terms of what it takes to do them. I won't spend a lot of time on the sub-bullets of this, but unless your company has truly acknowledged the fundamental difference between taking the next generation of your product, core products, into the market through incremental advancements to that, through standard workflows, gated processes that have built into the company in most cases for decades, if not 100 years. If you haven't sort of recognized and built a completely different methodology and set of resources and tools for disruptive innovation, I would argue that applying incremental innovation to disruptive innovation, i.e. innovation outside of your core, not only is not great, but it could be very, very damaging. And I think a lot of what we've seen is companies mistakenly trying to apply their incremental experience to the disruptive innovation work. So again, going very quickly on this, this gives you a sort of snapshot of what we've sort of seen as we've worked over the last decade. Many of you will remember the days of tech tourism, where the executives would load into the box and they'd go to Google and go down the sliding pine and go to Facebook and sort of be enamored by all the free food. But in that case, beyond excitement, there was very few tangible outcomes. We had corporate accelerators, corporate incubator programs. If we're really honest, they never actually worked. Then we started getting to open innovation, which, as you see there, is something we still use and still very much believe in. And I think based on what we see in the market, is still adding a lot of value to companies. There was a lot of companies that tried to install what they call the venture building operating system into these large companies. We saw it at Procter & Gamble. We've seen it in other places. It was good as a sort of starting point and getting people to sort of think differently. But if you think you can kind of just install an operating system using your existing people and resources and some of your existing processes and just kind of go through this training thing where, all of a sudden you've built this disruptive innovation department within your company. I've never seen it work. And so we can talk more about that maybe in the debrief next week. So what we're going to be talking today is mainly about hybrid venture models and spin-out models. And we'll talk more about what that is, but that's really applying these venture building methodologies in new ways to solve the innovator's dilemma. Very, very quickly, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page before we jump into the principles. I think we all know this, but let's just quickly define venture building. A venture is a disruptive growth initiative or disruptive startup initiative that goes beyond core products and or incremental innovation by combining a variety of new models and dynamics, which you can see in the diagram on the right. It's not just products, it's new business models, new service offerings, new digital services, new go-to-markets, leveraging new omni-channel strategies, and so forth. Venture building is the application of startup or lean tools to the design, development, and incubation of these new ventures within large companies. And then for those people that have built a venture studio, it's a scalable program designed to upskill internal teams, accelerate front-end innovation, and develop a portfolio of cross-category growth ventures. As I said, hopefully not completely internal or completely by yourself. Most of these programs have a structure somewhat similar to this, where they have a governance committee that acts almost as the VC over the portfolio. You have some model of checkpoint fundings and funding events and funding amounts and certain gates that are closer to the way a VC might look at Series A versus Series B. And then always a venture building methodology. And as you talk to the different companies like us, we all have slightly different views on the methodologies and what works and the tools. And then, within that venture building group and methodology, there's a set of services or capabilities, I should say, that run the gamut from early insights to in-market incubation and actual commerce transactions. And so, as I was saying, different venture studios, different companies can have different views on how to structure these methodologies and types of resources that could come internally and those that can come externally, which is a great jumping off point for expressing our views on what's worked. And I think some of them we'll find controversial. Some of them we'll only get to touch on today. But again, to Alex's point of next week's debrief, I hope that it's interesting enough that some of you want to come get into some lively debate beyond what we're capable of doing today. With that, as we get into the second section and the core of the program and the principles, I'll first pause and Alex ask if there's any questions or any points you want to make before we jump into it.
Jon, thanks. No, that's great. And we've got some good questions coming in about some of the language and some of the things that you're going to touch on with 1 through 5 coming up. So let's keep going and we'll hit those as we get there.
Great. So we're going to try to get through all 5 of these. It'll depend on how much, conversation, but we'll try to keep you on track. We have about, 7-8 minutes for each one. These are just 5 of our core venture principles. You can see 13 others that are listed on the left, and obviously happy to get on the phone with anybody at any time. We will be doing, hopefully in conjunction with InnoLead, a series of posts and work on a series that touches on each one of these and, in rolling out over the course of, a couple months. So look forward to that, but also look forward to either doing it next week or jumping on a one-on-one call if you're interested. Okay, so here are the 5 ones. Let's get into it. The first one, the misconception is that disruptive innovation is a linear funnel, but the reality is that disruptive innovation is inherently nonlinear. This is one of the most common mistakes or misconceptions that we see in our clients, and we've seen it cause some real damage. So let me expand on that a little bit. We have discover, generate, validate, incubate, and scale. I think many of you have seen this type of funnel where you start with some big opportunity areas and get down to some ideas, and then you start doing these sequential exercises and understanding the problem, the solution, the business model, the product market fit, growth strategies. I wish the world was that simple. And I wish we could just go from 3 big things down to 1 big winning scalable dot. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works in the startup world. And that's not, and if it was, VCs wouldn't have to invest in quite as many or see as many failures. And it's not definitely how it works in corporates. And, some of the early, and I guess I would move this diagram over to the left a little bit. That's my mistake. Some of the early stuff, obviously, you have early discovery and research and ideation. I'll buy that. Maybe you'll do definitely some early validation work, but once you start getting into that validation work, it gets really sort of multidimensional, and you can see some of that here. You've got to start looking more closely at the competitive landscape and your very specific differentiations and value proposition, and your solution better sort of tightly match your business model and your brand strategy, better meet your go-to-market strategy. All of that better be very sort of clearly outlined in your financial pro forma and your use of proceeds. And then your supply chain and cost of goods sold has to be able to support not only your pro forma model, but also your brand strategy, because you're going to assume a certain target and a certain price point. And if any one of these dots changes, and anyone that's done a startup knows this, it starts to change all of the other dots. And what you'll see in a startup is when you go to a VC, you try to tell a story from the beginning to end that connects all of these dots. And if the dots don't connect, the VCs are very good at spotting it. You'll see them start to flip ahead, and you've lost them. And so you'll go back with your co-founders and you'll start to try to say, well, where did we lose them? What didn't connect for them? And you'll start refining that. And that's why it takes 6+ months to raise capital as you sort of continue to refine not just your product by any stretch of the imagination, not just your consumer feedback, but your entire business. And we'll talk more about that. So what we see happen as a result of this misconception about this linear process is a lot of our corporation clients, we see them get stuck in this sort of ideation and validation cycle. I've seen companies do 10 rounds of $100,000 experimentation and then start to put the business together and realize they don't want to be in that business. I've seen companies spend months and months and months, can tell you everything about a pregnant mother and what they want, and never really figure out how to create a business out of it. This sort of experimentation loop has been going on for several years, and it's led to sort of us reaching a period in time where, quite frankly, our bosses are tired of hearing about learnings. They want growth businesses. And we're just, as much as we needed to go through those learnings as a community, as a market, to understand these differences between incremental and disruptive, and to start to get our heads around the types of programs that worked through the evolution that I showed, the time's up, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more today.
I'll jump in real quick, Jon, because, I think this is a really good point, and it's something I'm not sure we've really written about, but it's one thing to be an innovation leader. It's another thing to be, an entrepreneurial innovation leader, or to approach corporate innovation and growth as an entrepreneur. And in the latter case, you're building stuff. You're trying to create value. You're trying to make money. You're trying to get the needle moving outcomes, right, that the organization's seeking. And so you're like, how do I do good enough research? How do I do good enough to see and validate if this thing should move forward or not, and kill it quickly if it shouldn't? So I think you're right. I think a lot of organizations just do so much. Another round, deepen desirability, customer solution. I know you talk about jobs to be done next. And they just keep working on it, and they haven't gotten to viability. I know we'll talk about that later too, which is there really a business here? Because if there isn't, and that's frequently the issue, is you probably kill it sooner. You're going to find a lot of consumers who will love the thing that you can't deliver. So just emphasizing that. We've got some good, questions we'll touch on a little bit later around it. But I think that's a key thing. Like, at some point, you've got to say, is this going to be a business? And if we really think it is, move it forward. And if not, stop doing more research, refining something that will never go to market and never make money.
Exactly. We can launch the R&E Loop questionnaire, and I'd love to get people's feedback on whether they've seen this phenomena in their companies or in other companies. To Alex's point, at some point you got to bite the bullet and make the investment. So you can do all the $20,000, $100,000 experiments that you want. If you don't get to the point where you can ask for $100,000 $1 million, only to find out that they don't want to give you $1 million, then it's a bit of a bummer.
I'll say, Jon, so the poll question's up. Everybody take a look. Please respond. Let's try to get the vast majority of you weighing in. Again, the question is, we experience excessive research and experimentation loops within our company. So you just get sort of stuck just doing lots of research, lots of testing and learning, but ultimately you never move, I would say, productively and efficiently and effectively to those decisions. So everybody, let's take a second more. Please put in your answers, never, rarely, occasionally, frequently, or very frequently. And then we will show the results. Yeah, let's stop it now. You want to trigger the results and let's take a look. Perhaps not surprising, John. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the people that say occasionally may be hedging a little bit. So
Right.
I still think it's 37%. And I bet in actual reality it might be slightly higher than that. But yeah, I think this is directionally correct. All right, cool. Let's move on to the next one, which may be the most controversial one. I know it was for Alex, but let me explain myself. If you've read Craig Christensen's work, as well as lean startup and so forth, it's all about consumer jobs to be done, and that makes sense, right? We don't want to build a product that nobody wants. We definitely see that in the startup world, although I would argue that most startups fail less because they don't have the right product and more because they never figure out their go-to-market and business model, or the structure and organization of their company. But I would argue it's not really all, with an underline under all, about consumer jobs to be done. And this clearly links to this experimentation loop problem that I just mentioned. So let me explain myself a little bit further. So look, I'm not saying you don't have to look at consumer pains. Of course you do. I'm saying two things. One is that everything you need to know about what you should do next is not going to be learned from your consumer. The telephone did not come into existence by persistent incremental improvement of the postcard. But even more than that, we need to look more broadly. And look, some of you are going to say, like, well, obviously we do this. But what I'm really arguing is that we need to do this sooner. And as you'll see, we need to have a creative mindset in how we do it. If we look at, I don't know, let's say Airbnb, they just went to market. They thought they were going to be sort of a system for people going to large tech conferences to sleep on each other's couches. It wasn't until they, really got into it that they're like, holy crap, we're going to reinvent the hospitality industry. When you hear Elon Musk talk, of course he needs to design the car that people want, although I would argue that some of his first models were not that. But what you hear him talking about was the convergence of sustainability with battery technology, and increasing focus on climate change. And it was these major paradigm shifts that ended up driving his ability to fund and helped him to understand that now was the time to get to market. And others had tried, but he knew when to do it, and he knew how to go to market, and he understood the broader paradigm shifts. And so, the other point I would make is, I'm not saying that we don't need to talk to our consumers. I'm saying we don't need to front load talking to our consumers. Of course, we want to validate our concepts. Of course, we want to understand jobs to be done. But you really need to mix that with these broader dimensions, and you need to be doing consumer research always on through every part, even when you're in market, obviously, and you don't and shouldn't front load it in some hope that you'll do consumer research to the point where you de-risk this to the point that you don't have anything to worry about, because you will absolutely never get there. And I can't tell you, again, how many times I see companies do this and never get to market, and definitely never get some growth out of it. The way to do this, and I mentioned earlier this open innovation methodology, in our view, the way to do this is to make sure that you have an infrastructure and a research capability to do what we call open innovation. And that is to reach beyond your four walls and to bring the outside in, which again is obvious, definitely obvious in terms of, consumer research software and surveying, but not as obvious when it comes to really sort of broadly understanding the market, the competitive research, the technology, state of the art, art of the possible, understanding where VC investment is going, understand what competitors are doing, what they're actually building. And as large companies, you have very powerful logos that will allow you to tap into this ecosystem. And this open innovation methodology is based on this simple tenet that the fastest, most effective way to identify threats, understand emerging trends and technologies, and to discover new growth opportunities is to go to the source, the VCs, the entrepreneurs, technologists that are inventing tomorrow's solutions. And we've built, as part of our business, a substantial business doing this for these major brands. And we've developed a methodology and set of tools, and increasingly using artificial intelligence to really bring this information together, not just in a giant research report, but more in a perspective that drives to where to play opportunities and how to activate, and accounts for these paradigm shifts in conjunction with the broader consumer needs. And this is an example of one of our reports, but showing it more to show you the types of things. The most important one is this domain landscape and the associated startup maps, which I'm sure all of you have seen. This one's a personal healthcare landscape, but when you start breaking down the market into these different domains and subdomains, it provides a lexicon or a taxonomy for understanding the market you're really playing in and where you really want to play. And if you go out and talk to some of the players in these different domains and you start connecting the dots, you'll be amazed on the perspectives that you get that are well beyond what we traditionally see some of our customers getting. Obviously, these are big generalizations. And then you can sort of look at what these individual startups are doing, and to connect that to market size and connect that back to consumer and market data, and then use that to sort of get to a place where you understand your where to play choices. You kind of got to see this to believe it, but it's been one of the most powerful tools that has driven the growth of our company. And we love it, and we're very good at it.
And we've got a bunch of great questions and comments, and we may have to get some of these at the Ask Us Anything call. I think there are folks asking about the jobs to be done piece, and you and I actually talked about it, and I'll frame it up, and then you can build. I think there's sort of the point of understanding, seeing the world through the lens of jobs to be done. It's the whole thing, to Steve Jobs' point, right? You can't ask the customer what they want, right? That's where you get the faster horse, Henry Ford type thing. You ask them about the stories, you ask them to talk about their experiences, right? You extract sort of the outcomes, all those things underneath, right? And that's the way to get the insights. But frequently as well, you can identify, right, new technologies and solutions, and you can figure out what jobs they get done, right? So I think, John, to some extent, that's part of your point, right? Which is, jobs to be done are important, but also scanning the horizon, what's out there, what are the new techs, what are the new solutions, what jobs can they get done? And then having that informed too. Is that a good way to frame it?
Yeah, and I think absolutely. And I think it's dead on. And I think we also have to ask ourselves, I've spent 25 years in the Silicon Valley. I've been part of a unicorn. I've watched a lot of failures and starts, and I can count on maybe 10% of the companies that I know of did extensive consumer research and job to be done through direct consumer research before launching their product. Mm-hmm. Airbnb didn't do it. Tesla didn't do it. Slack didn't do it. The list goes on and on and on. So I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right for corporates, but corporate cultures are very different, and what you need to do to get that investment is very different. So don't take it the wrong way. I'm just saying that you have to ask yourself, why is it that way? And what is the right compromise? And what is the right way to use outside signals, as well as what is the right way and time to use consumer signals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Another one, let's hit real quick. So the research and experimentation loop. Actually, one person in the chat say we ran out of money, before we can get stuck in the loop. So that's clearly a forcing function. But any other suggestions you'd have to help folks get out of that loop when they're stuck in it?
Yeah, it's a great segue to the next principle we're going to do. So maybe before we jump into that, we can sort of launch the over-index poll question and get a little bit of feedback on this one, and then we can move on and answer that question in an interesting way.
Yeah, so here's a great way to measure. So the question is, my company over-indexes to consumer research and or can get stuck in endless cycles of research and experimentation. So let's kind of build off where we were before. Never, rarely, occasionally, frequently, or very frequently. Again, please take a moment, click on your response. Let's get a lot of you in and see where you end up. And again, consumer research is fun. It's a lot of fun to do, focus groups and to prototype and to do all that stuff. Like that whole front end desirability piece, that's cool. Like a lot of people get into innovation to do that. So, you could just make a nice home there. And
yeah, I think if I was going to change this question, I might have said over-index in upfront early consumer research. And this will make a little more sense when we get into the next principle. So I think these numbers make sense, and a great jumping off point, as well as the question to our next point, where hopefully this will get tied together.
Yeah, let's take a look real quickly at the results. So again, we recently see the bit of a bell curve there, right? So occasionally, frequently, very frequently, I think sort of that top three box is certainly, where most of the responses are. Not surprising, huh, John?
No, not surprising, not surprising. And I think there's great conversation around people's opinion that it's rarely and occasionally, and those that are on the upper end of occasionally and frequently. And I think that's would be a fascinating multi-hour dialogue to really understand what this compromise is and how people are doing it and what the right balancing act is. And obviously, we're trying to be provocative in making these statements so that we can generate these conversations. Because I think the important point is the conversation, not being right or not being right. I definitely know it's an important factor based on this decade of doing this work for sure. So I think that's a great jumping off point for this next one. And this kind of aligns those two, right? Okay, well, is it really a funnel, and how much experimentation do we do? When do we ask for how much money? How do we avoid getting stuck in loops and spending a lot of energy on things that never make it to market, things that get killed after, a year of small investments, only to find out that the money's not there. And also this point about looking more externally and trying to understand the bigger story and how to not just think about the product, but to think about the business. So let me explain that in a little bit more detail. So our argument when we say don't get stuck in the loop and don't get stuck in consumer research up front is you got to get to the business sooner. And we'll talk about what that means, but I want to give you an example here. We worked with a company that was, and it's not the ones, well, they were thinking about launching a hybrid diaper, and there was a couple in the market. It makes a ton of sense, right? Sustainability, when people don't want to use cloth diapers, but they try it because they want to do the best thing and the right thing. But the convenience of the disposable is just too much, too attractive for young parents. And they spent quite a bit of time, I would say, quite a bit of time. They had product in shelves at Target that got delisted, partially because I think of a go-to-market strategy. But they had spent as I said, a substantial amount of time and money, and they could tell you everything about cloth diapers and what people liked about cloth diapers and didn't like, and people's perception on sustainability and how much they would pay to pay for sustainable products. Turns out most people say one thing in the survey and a different thing in the aisle. But putting that aside, it went on and on. When we came in, what we drove to, you'll see in a minute, is the full business plan. And this is more than a one-pager. I would argue it's more than a six-pager sort of Amazon structure. It's a fully integrated business plan. And when we came in and started that exercise, I would say in a matter of a week to 2 weeks, two things became very, very clear. One is that in order to sell this proposition, you were going to have to sell against a mound of disposable diapers. And that's not the company's fault. That's just the practical reality of the choices that consumers make. And so you ask yourself, well, are you willing to put up, a giant mound of disposable diapers in landfill as part of your sort of positioning and marketing? And then secondly, this insert that we're talking about, it's much easier to make than a sophisticated pull-up diaper with super advanced technology, and the amount of technology and research that goes into that, as well as the complexity of producing it, is staggering. And the people that do it the best, really, it's amazing what they've been able to do. We brought those two issues to the bosses. And as I said, within a week, that thing was killed. So it's not uncommon to get stuck in this loop, to do endless experimentation, as one person said, to run out of money. And you're left with a giant binder of consumer insights, only to be told, we're not in that business. It's going to cannibalize our current product. There's no way to land it. We don't care about it if it's not $1 billion investment. We would never invest that much. We're having a hard quarter. And to be totally frank, this is what we've seen time and time and time again for the last 5+ years. And as I said, time's up. This is not acceptable any longer. And if it's still acceptable in your company, I guarantee you within the next 2 years, it will not be. And those companies that have not figured out how to transition to growth will see aspects of their more aggressive disruptive innovation programs, obviously not their incremental programs, cut back significantly. So how do we try to force our clients to get to the business? We've adopted the two sort of fundamental tools, and these are tools that come out of the startup world. I've been at 6 or 7 startups. I've had the opportunity to raise tens of millions of dollars. There is no way I could have ever raised that money without a very detailed venture plan. And I'm not just talking the venture pitch, which is the 10-slide deck that you sort of narrow it down to. I'm talking the much longer deck. And some of most of them, I would say, these decks are 50, 70 or more slides. And I'm not going to be able to explain why. And everyone's going to be like, oh, no, you got to get it down to 1 page. They're never going to read it. I understand that. But what I can tell you, and maybe you won't take to heart, is that it's not the final document of this 70-page document. It's the exercise of going through and creating this. And anyone who started a startup will understand the months of fighting at the whiteboard, the months of trying to create slides, make the story connect, even down to lexicon. You call it faster, I call it quicker. You call it scalable, I call it, performance capable, et cetera, et cetera. So the most powerful tool that we've brought into our clients is this venture plan structure. You can see the basic outline of any venture plan, from the opportunity, how that opportunity in terms of paradigm shifts, customer needs, jobs to be done, emerging technology trends, new state-of-the-art capabilities that weren't there before. How does that opportunity translate to your solution? How does that solution differ from what's in the marketplace? How does that link to your brand strategy and your go-to-market strategy? I will tell you, I tell this to my kids all the time, go-to-market strategies are more important than product strategies. You can have a great product and it will never make it to market. You can have a terrible product and an awesome go-to-market strategy and you will win. So we have all this emphasis on the product and the consumer and what they need. And then many, many companies do not have the experience in going to market, and therefore they don't scale fast enough. People lose their nerve. Everything that you do in these first sections must connect to your business model and your operational and your financial pro forma. There is no reason to design the most beautiful product in the world and find out that your sales assumptions, cost of goods sold, and marketing acquisition costs are too high to get the investment that you need to do it. It makes no sense. So the second most important tool that we've introduced is the financial or cash flow, with an emphasis on cash flow pro forma. This is not a full P&L and balance sheet and grad school level model that you would create for an operating business, but it is a very, very effective tool because it forces you to look at every single assumption in your business, whether that's your COGS, whether that's your hiring plan, your expenses, the cost of your going to market strategy, your marketing costs, your sort of burn rate, your product roadmap, and all of that will translate to a burn rate, and that burn rate matched against the level of investment will give you a cash flow and tell you what funding you need. So I don't know how anyone asks for money without going through this exercise. And it all starts with some revenue assumptions. Yes, we know that those are going to kind of be BS. We know we're not going to hit those typically, but you start there, you build out every other single assumption. And if you build this right, you should be able to very quickly say, you know what, we got to get our cost of goods sold down. What if we get that down by $1? How much less investment do we need? Okay, let's go back and look at our solution. And what would it take to build that solution for $1 cheaper? Or could we run with less people? Who would we not hire? Or who would we push out the hire of? How much development are we doing on this product in terms of advancing it? Do we need to advance it that fast? So every single question you could think about in your business is in the pro forma and in the venture plan. And the story and the dots that you connect in this venture plan must absolutely match your pro forma. And if you've ever raised money in the Valley, the fastest way to get that shut down is to say something in your plan or your pitch about your go-to-market strategy, and then have them look at your pro forma and say, this pro forma would never support that go-to-market strategy. Within a nanosecond, they'll tell you to go back and rework it, and they'll tell you that they're not going to invest. So again, I just would close and then turn it to you, Alex, that these two tools are the most powerful tools that we've seen. And there's a lot of methodology built around them. There's a lot of sub-tools, canvases perhaps, that go around it. But these are the final deliverables. And lastly, what I'll say is these deliverables get taken and allow you to justify the investment that you need. And if they come back and say, that's great, but you have some leap of faith assumptions built into this, then you can go back, as I said, and do more consumer research. But you've driven to the business, because if they look at this and say, look, we're never going to invest $5 million, it doesn't make any sense to go back and do additional consumer research, because it's not the customer, it's not the product, it's the fundamental business model and the fundamental strategy of your company and whether they support that specific disruptive growth initiative. So I'll get off my soapbox. I'll turn that back to Alex.
Yeah, Jon, thank you. So I think it's great. Certainly, in theory, in some way, for teams that are building adjacent or then obviously transformational new things. But again, there's that concern, which I think has been discussed broadly, which is, well, as Scott Cook, who founded Intuit, frequently said, for every idea that failed, I had a spreadsheet that looked fantastic. So I think the common wisdom is don't get hung up too soon on points of precision on these forecasts, the pro formas, all of those sorts of things, because it's all unknown. And it's going to take a while before you can even get to something you're remotely confident in. So, I mean, again, it's one thing, certainly, if you're looking to build a startup and you have to go out and raise money and that's what funders are going to look for. But how should this resonate with folks leading innovation teams and companies? And they're just trying to, okay, is there a customer with a problem? Does this solution work for them? Can we make money? They're starting those high level questions and assumptions. How quickly should they even try to get to all the detail you're sharing?
But what I would push back on there is that what Scott Cook was amazing at was getting product to market and learning in market. And he stumbled upon an amazing amount of things, including aspects of TurboTax and so forth. But the other thing is that, look, this is not a financial model that says, guys, it's a slam dunk. Here's my banker looking financial model, and let's look at that. Oh my God, it's an amazing opportunity. How could we pass it up? The thing I would emphasize over and over again is building this pro forma is not the financial statement. It's an exercise to connect the strategy, the sort of product you have, the market environment you're going into, the way you plan to go into that market, and connecting that to the financial investment needs in a way that is very sort of detailed, deliberate, and you can churn the dials or explain any of the settings of dials to help provide a level of transparency and risk mitigation that simply cannot happen in a one-page document. And if anyone argues to me that they can do back of the envelope, business canvas, financial model, say, well, it's this business model and we're going to charge this much and we'll send this much thing, and I just put it in these 7 boxes, it's just fundamentally not true. And that's not me. That is years of working in the startup ecosystem. I'm not saying that corporates are startup. I'm saying that startups know how to do disruptive innovation, and it's been a sort of set of tools and processes that have been built into the Valley for years and years. And we just need to learn from that. And again, all of this is meant to be provocative. It's all, sort of certain levels of compromise under here. But the fundamental exercise, to me, is what separates getting funded at the level you need, not wasting time, and then trying to quickly drive to some tangible growth outcomes.
And I'll build off that real quick, and then let's keep going, because some good comments in the chat, which align with what you said. I mean, ultimately, there's a whole bunch of assumptions that have to prove true across desirability, viability, and feasibility for anything to be anything, for you to actually build a new venture, a new business, a product that's just not a cost center. And so you've got to have all of those assumptions prove true across the board. And so if you spend too much time focusing on, jobs to be done and customer and the ideas and whatever, and you're not spending enough time on like go to market, like you said, or is there a business here? And that's where the deal killers are, right? That's really bad. So, thinking early on, hey, I've got to cover all of these assumptions. That's really important. And then there's a great comment in the chat, which basically says, ultimately, you've got to win internal stakeholders over. And so what's the language that they want to speak? You've got to speak it. And so if you've got folks that are really moved, right? And you're going to get to storytelling. If you've got folks that are really moved by, emotional stories coming from end users, great. If you've got folks who are more financially oriented and they said, give me your financial assumptions, maybe it's not like, endless points of precision, but it's saying, here's the assumptions we're going to test that have to prove true for this to be the size of business that matters. So anyway, I think that's a really good point. Look, if you're in an environment where there's certain expectations of, a viability story from you, you better be working on that viability story because that's what your stakeholders are going to need to approve.
Yeah, and I would argue, and just to clarify the point, and agreeing with everything you've said, is that we're talking about here is process and methodology. And so, I'm not saying that it's not great to do a business feasibility, viability, blah, 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 canvas or whatever canvas you want early on. What I am saying is that those tools will not force you to think through it at the level of detail that you need to really sort of be able to talk convincingly, to be able to address any point, and to be able to support and explain your leap of faith assumptions. It doesn't mean that there's not a ton of leap of faith assumptions or things that can go wrong. It means that you have a strong, detailed hypothesis about everything you're saying, and you've thought through it. And I can't, I have this problem all the time. And the last thing I'll say before we jump in this next section is we start working with clients and we're like building these longer business plans, and you'll see for a reason we make them pretty. We do storytelling, and they're like frustrated. They're like, oh God, why are we doing this? They'll never read it. And I continually say to them, look, trust me, trust the work. You're over there trying to figure out the cost of goods sold. You're over there doing research. You're over there looking at the solution, the technical architecture. You're building a prototype. You're building the pro forma. You're over here thinking about go-to-market strategies, and trust that these mechanisms will bring them all together. And when they bring them all together, the truth will set you free. And the truth is whether you can get the investment. And every single time people go through this exercise and then they ask me for a job, because it is so enlightening and so sort of invigorating for them that they get it. So, and I'm not saying that a lot of you don't do this. I'm not saying that a lot of you don't know this. I'm just highlighting it as a very major point of emphasis. And so I'm going to skip the poll. We can come back to it if we have time, but I want to connect what we just said to this point, which is one of my deepest passions, the deepest sort of reasons for my success in terms of the liquidity events and selling of startups, as well as starting this company, I would say, to the degree that I have been successful. But I tell this to my kids all the time. Your ideas, take your idea and pinch your fingers together and then pinch them tighter. And that's what your idea is worth. Because it's really about the things we've just talked about. And it's about being able to tell the story. And if there's anything I tell my kid, I say, look, much of my career, much of my life, I would argue, is about storytelling. And so what the book by Nick Morgan, who's also out of Harvard, and is a sort of a cognitive behaviorist and among other things, and wrote in this Power Cues book that in our information saturated age, business leaders won't be heard unless they are telling stories. Facts and figures and all the rational things that we think are important in the business world actually don't stick in our minds at all, especially if you try to get to the VP level and beyond. Emphasizing that sort of obvious point from Richard Branson, the single most important job of any startup entrepreneur is storytelling. You don't have to look at any much further than Elon Musk. He spends half his life telling stories. Some of them are getting tiresome, but he is a master storyteller. He's also a master engineer. He's also a master business person, but a big part of it is that he's a master storyteller. And so what we end up finding is that as we move into this competitive age, and what happens in the Valley and happens perhaps there more than many other places in the world, is this combination of the technical side, but also applying the right brain dominance as the new competitive advantage. And that's about creativity, intuition about the paradigms and how they're going to come together, arts, creation, feeling, and imagination. And you just simply cannot get money out of large corporations unless you're passionate and confident in your story. And the only way to convey what you want to do in the time that you will be given is to be able to tell a super compelling story. And if they ask you to double click, you can tell the next level of the story. And if they ask you to double click again, you can continue to double click. And when the double clicks don't work, your story falls apart. For me, maybe I shouldn't have used a canvas here, but I can't tell you how many times I hear, oh, that's good. That's 15 slides. We need to get it down to 2. Oh, they won't look at more than 3 slides. No, we have a one-pager format, and we need to put it into the one-pager format. One-pagers and an over-reliance on these canvases is not an elimination, but an over-reliance is where innovation goes to die. And it blows my mind that I literally have seen executives make billion-dollar investments that went south. I'm not going to quote them by name, but I could quote multiple. And they literally refuse to read a 35-page document. I'm like, are we in kindergarten? Like, are we now at a certain point in our career incapable of reading something that's longer than 5 pages? Are we not interested in understanding all of the nuances of making a billion-dollar investment? Or do we just look at these one-pagers and say go, and then find out later that there were 15 assumptions that, had you asked, would have sort of led you to understand? And this is what VCs do day in and day out. And the Sequoias and the Graylocks, those people that are successful are master sort of listeners and able to listen to stories and find the nuances and see where the dots don't connect or where they do connect, and where they connect not only with themselves, but with the paradigm and where they think the market's going, and with the team, and whether they believe the team is capable of executing the strategy that they have laid out. So this is kind of an obvious one. I don't know how controversial it is, but I can tell you that there is some really talented storytellers, and there's a lot of really bad ones, and a lot of sort of intolerance for the level of storytelling that I believe needs to be done to get innovation funded, and to have the passion and the drive to not just experiment, but to have the guts to take on the scary fun of trying to incubate and scale any venture.
Jon, why don't you real quickly hit your last point, because we're going to run out of time. Let's do that. Maybe hit a question or two. And then everybody, we're going to, as I said, we'll post the replay and the slides, and we'll follow up with you on your questions and your comments. And also, again, next week, as I mentioned, please join our Ask Us Anything call, where you'll be on Zoom as a Zoom meeting, and let's just discuss a bunch of these points, because I think Jon's thinking good ones, and also ones we know are controversial. So we'll talk about it then. But Jon, yeah, hit your last point, and we'll go from there.
Great, thank you, Alex. So all of this comes together. Look, everything we've talked about, not getting stuck in experimentation loops, driving to substantial business plans, building venture plans, which are really financial and detailed plans wrapped in stories. These things all lead to just one fundamental thing, which is, can I get funding? It's no use. Look, you're not going to launch anything of any meaning for less than a few $1 million. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to do it for 500,000. Maybe you can do something for $1 million. More than not, like a home remodel, it's double plus what you think it's going to be. So look, you need access to $3 million. Maybe you don't need it all at once, but you definitely need visibility to $3 million. And let's argue it's 2 or 5. It's not $100,000. It's not $300,000. It's not $500,000. Of course, they can dole this out in tranches and say, look, I can get this done for a seed round of 500,000. But it doesn't make any sense to get a seed round if there's no VC that is going to take you to the market and give you the runway you need to scale. So innovation requires meaningful and speculative investment. This is not the specialty of large corporations. This is the specialty of VCs, and a lot of corporations have built programs where they try to pretend they're VCs. We talked about those at the very beginning. They haven't worked. So everything we talk about kind of boils down to this. As I said, that funding should follow a model that you see here. That's really one of the most powerful tools in the Silicon Valley, which is this ability to create scarcity and enforce milestones, and separate what's winning from losing. Probably one of the biggest problems that we see in corporates is an inability to stop, an inability to kill things that are never going to work, but they emotionally don't let it go, or they're like, oh, just give it $100,000 more, let's see where it goes. These are the things we're trying to stop. And when you combine the things that we've talked about, as well as some of the other principles that we won't have time to talk about, and you put these incremental funding events while still having visibility to larger funding, if you are successful, what ends up happening is the venture plan and the pro forma become the foundational hypothesis. We know it's not going to work. We know we're not going to hit the numbers. We know our CAC will be higher. We know our revenue will be lower. We know that things that we said were true about our product aren't actually going to be true. But what it does is it creates a fundamental hypothesis that is deeply rooted, meaning we're all using the same lexicon, we've all seen the same pro forma, et cetera. And then we can use that as we go to our board meetings. Now, the last thing I'll close on is two very quick points, and I think this is a great topic for follow-up. We've launched a very interesting model called Spin Out, Spin In Ventures. I won't have time to talk about it in totality, but essentially what this does is allow large companies to take venture investment off of the balance sheet and to do it from cash. And many of our clients, all of our clients, have real problems with putting, more than a certain amount on the P&L. It affects the quarter, dividends, whatever else. At the same time, they have $1 billion of cash that they need to put to work. We've developed some mechanisms. We've used it with P&G. We've used it with Nestle. We've used it with Altria. We've used it with Diageo, where small newcos are created. In the beginning, the newco and the team of the newco is the majority owners of it. That way, the corporate is a minority owner. They are indemnified from certain things. They can invest in rounds. Those rounds are pre-described in the initial investment documents. And then as they go, they become larger and larger owners until they get close to 100%. And then they have multiples to buy it back into the company. And then there's also certain tax breaks as you do this. So this has been a massive unlock for us. And I would love to talk to more of you about it. I think it is the future of venture building. If I really want to be controversial, I can say that I don't think any large company, I would say 85% of large companies are not capable of doing this fully in-house, and will fail.
And John, let's actually wrap on that slide because we're at the top of the hour. We're going to talk about more next week at the Ask Us Anything call. I just want to make the point, John. I think, ultimately what you're laying out, I think is important for everybody to understand is there's a bit of cold water that should be poured on a bunch of these sort of innovation building sort of best practices that are so focused on the front end. Because ultimately, the vast majority of things are not commercially viable, and they're not going to move the needle for companies. And many more of them should get killed earlier than they do. But so much just goes on and on because you can do all that research and experimentation. John said, "Oh, this is great," And again, any of us can get into focus groups and get consumers to say they'll buy something. It's easy, right? You can lead the witness. So I think the point is that John's making. Everybody will talk about it next week as well. It's just you got to bring in that dose of reality, which is in the end, could this thing get funded? Could it actually get built? Is there a business case here? Could we remotely get to some of these details that John's talking about? Because most innovation teams, they wait way too long to get there, or they never get there. And then they're actually not building businesses. They're just building costly products, and services that won't go commercial. So John, maybe one more, 30 more seconds, and then we'll thank everybody and we'll follow.
No, I couldn't say it better. And I think it's a great summarization. I think that there's, the question is how to get there. And what it looks like to get there sooner, and how to use these mechanisms to put cold water on those, to put warm water on others. As you see here, as we've gone across our different years, we've been writing down these principles. Maybe, hopefully someday I'll write a book. Just much more to talk about. And it's all about exactly what Alex said, getting to the business sooner, getting the right investments in the right things to generate growth, and understanding that the days of soft learnings and insights and successful experiments are just going to end. There's nothing we can do about it. And if you add AI on top of that, and what it's able to do on the front end, the back end is going to become even more important than the front end. So thank you very much. I hope this is nothing else has provoked some thoughts, and I would love to, talk to people, not to sell our services, but I love this topic and I love talking to people that want to debate it. So thank you.
Yeah, John, thank you. We're gonna have a lot of fun on that Ask Us Anything call. All of you, thank you. I know we're a minute after the top of the hour. Really appreciate you joining us today. Again, hope you found it valuable. We'll share the slides in the replay with you. We'll follow up. We'll have that call in a week. We're happy to have a discussion on any of these points because they're really important to have. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us at InnoLead or John with any questions. And we're absolutely happy to keep the conversation going. John, thanks so much. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day and the end of the week towards the weekend. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.